Welcome to Gotham Sound TV. I'm Joe or Mulica with Peter Schneider.
Hey.
This week we kind of want to dig into something a little deeper. A lot of times we show a product and it allows you to kind of see what that product does, how it works, and then how it can be useful to you. This is kind of our first iteration of something we want to call Gotham Labs, where we dig a little deeper into some of the problem solving that our customers come to us with. And Peter is, kind of our head nerd for that, and kind of takes a lot of phone calls from people saying, "Hey, I'm on set and we need to do this. How do I do that?" And we go, interesting. So we integrate a lot of different products to solve those problems. So with that, what's our first problem we're digging into?
So the first problem is, and thanks for that introduction, by the way, but the first problem we're digging into is something that I came across. I was part of a job, communications for a TV show called Lost in Space, constantly running coax out for the communication signals. Between the receive and the transmit, it was 150 feet for each leg of times 3. So
this was a show with like eight actors that could be on set at the same time. They all had transmitters on, but also receivers to hear.
Yeah, and giving them all mixed minuses, and they were big sets, like lots of heavy machinery, running over the coax. Every time you run over coax with something, you deform it a little bit. Right. It was a problem, and we constantly had to chase stuff around. And it really sort of inspired me. I started thinking, the transmitters were Dante transmitters. They were the Electrosonics M2Ts. Could I power the transmitters over the same Dante signal, over that same Cat5? And by the reverse, could I have receivers and power those receivers and get the audio over the same Cat5? And so that was the problem that I started to think about, and that's sort of what we're going to talk about here. It kind of kept going, and we finally, grew it to a point where I was like, okay, well, let's stop. We don't have an actual application for this, but I think the goal is to inspire anybody crazy enough to watch this video. Not just end users, but also manufacturers, hopefully, because I think what is on this table has a lot of potential.
Right. So one of the things that we were just talking about was eliminating some of the coax, some of the 150-foot runs, 100-foot runs.
Right.
And so where do we want to start? There's a lot of stuff on this table.
Yeah, so I'll start with, it's obviously just, to start, that's desirable, right? 150 feet of coax times 3 runs. Of low-loss coax, that's very expensive, it's very heavy, it's very fragile. Replacing it with a single 150-foot run of Cat5 is desirable because it's cheap and light.
And you can get it anywhere if something breaks. Or
yeah, exactly. What I've put together is, if you sort of think of it as our left to right, on our left side would be a kind of sound cart. And I'll talk about why I think of that as a sound card. Think of this in terms of functional, not literal. And then we have the Cat5 in the middle. This could be any legal length of Cat5, so up to 100 meters of Cat5. And then on the right side of the table, over here, would be something ideally put in a single rack mount case, pigeon, pancake, light stand, remoted out to set. Right. So
this is your on set, and this is your run to keep the receivers, close to the talent, but then be able to have all the audio, all of the telemetry back there in your car.
Right. Here's our Cat5 between that we do that with. So a couple of things. The way we're going to do this is we're going to have a laptop simulate an audio recorder. If we switch, Jared, to the laptop screen for a second, let me just pull up Dante Controller so people can see what's in our Dante network. And yeah, I think it's worth stating, this is doing it via Dante. This is not This is not like getting analog audio through a balun and keeping it analog audio over Cat5. This is, can we have something remoted on set that generates a Dante signal and then have it be Dante over Cat5. So this is our Dante controller. What we've chosen, if we look at our Dante transmitters here, I'm just going to double click there, that's an A10 rack. And Jared, if we just switch to the wide shot, this is the A10 rack from Audio Limited. We'll do an insert of the front so we don't have to flip everything around. But the A10 rack, for those that aren't familiar with it, tune into our video we did a couple of weeks ago. But it is basically 4 slot receivers and a Dante converter and RF distribution over 12 volt DC. So you know, immediately I was drawn to that device because it has you know, the ability to do 8 channels of audio, and it's got the analog to Dante converter built into it, and it natively runs over 12 volts. So does that?
Yeah, I mean, perfect for a sound card, but
right. But perfect for remoting, possibly.
Right, and very robust in terms of being in the field and set apart. Right.
So just functionally, and we'll have a diagram for you guys to watch to see. But functionally, right now, what I've accomplished is I've taken my Audio Limited rack and I filled it with. In our case, it's 2 Audio Limited receivers, and then a WYSICOM, and then an Electro. It's literally what we had lying in the rental bins.
Right.
But some very special advantages when you use it natively with Audio Limited, which I'll get into in a few minutes. And I've remoted it, you know, up to 300 feet, 100 meters away from the sound card. And now I have to figure out a way to power it, right? Because right now it's just dead. It's just sitting on the edge of set.
Yeah.
Right, dead. So that's where we get into this technology called Power over Ethernet. You'll see it abbreviated as PoE. Some people call it PoE. I don't quite think that's right.
No.
But anyways, you know, look, I am. I come from tinkering from computers since I was a kid. I don't know all of the tech, you know, like the specifics of the tech terms. Power over Ethernet, in my mind, is like an umbrella term that can refer to any method of combining power and data over an Ethernet cable.
Right.
So there's lots of ways to do it. I went with the way that stuck to industry standards. And there's actually like codified standards for power over Ethernet. I think the latest standard, if anybody's really going deep into the woods on this, is 802.11.AT. So I wanted to stick with those standards. And so when you stick with those standards, you can't just like, some implementations are, let's call them dumb. They just take, you know, there's 8 conductors in a Cat5 cable. They reserve some of them for data and some of them for power, and they just, you know, blast the voltage down the line. I didn't want to do that because, you know, sets are volatile places. Somebody runs over your cable, causes a dead short. That's not good. You know, I want there to be sort of known off-the-shelf standards that take care of safety. So part of this Power over Ethernet 802 standard is that it doesn't just turn on the voltage, right?
Right.
There's a device on the far end that has to negotiate how much power it needs, and there's a device on what I'll call the sound card end that has to you know, understand that negotiation and then supply the appropriate amount of current and voltage. Let's talk about voltage. Things in our world run on 12 volts.
Yep.
You know, Ohm's law comes into serious play when you're dealing with 300 feet of cable, right? So Cat5 watt is typically 22 gauge, something like that. Running 300 feet, you're talking about a serious voltage drop if you start with 12 volts. So part of the standard is it ends up at 48 volts. And I think it actually starts at 54 volts on the source side in order to you know, accommodate that,
that loss over
that. So let's start to get into some of the specifics of how we did this.
Okay.
So power over Ethernet is typically supplied by switches. It's not always supplied by switches, but typically supplied by switches. Now, one of the challenges that I came across was, switches that supply power over Ethernet. If you were an electronics designer, the simplest way to implement it would just be have a 54-volt input on it, right? And then that's sort of what you work with to send it down to Cat5 with some electronics in between. That's not so film set friendly. I wanted to find a switch that's 12 volts natively, and then kicks it up to the standard. And so that's where the CamSwitch for mobile comes in.
Here.
I think if we, thank you, Joe. And so this device, and it's a little gnarly, that's not typically what you'd see on a location product, but that's the 12-volt power input. It's actually pretty cool. I think it takes 10 to 30 volts in. And it will kick out, and I think it even says the standard, 802.3 AT, power over Ethernet switch. So it'll take 10 to 30 volts in, DC, and then is part of this standard. You can see it's built fairly robust. It's got a big heat sink. You're holding it. This is actually running, I think, of all the devices, this is pretty cool. Running pretty
not too hot, yeah. Warm.
This is also acting as our Dante switch. Now, I want us to take a slight diversion. One thing you will notice about this switch is that it is not a gigabit switch. So I just want to dispel the myth that you must always have a gigabit switch for Dante.
Okay.
This is 100 megabits. It's a 100 megabit switch. They're working on a gigabit switch version of this. Down the, it'll show up down the line in a few months. But for 16 channels of Dante audio, you don't need gigabit. So this is perfectly fine for kicking audio around most of the sets that we're talking about. And so, if we follow this blue cable, it goes into, this is just an Ethercon barrel adapter into our Ethercon cable. Follow that to the next, thank you, Joe. There's the next barrel down the line, over to here. And the first thing we come to after the Ethernet cable is this. This is a 802.11 splitter, power splitter. And what this is doing is it's taking in the 48 volts. It negotiates for the proper amount of power. And it's splitting out, it's set to 12 volts out of this connector here.
Okay, so we're coming all the way from
200
feet away. We've come across our Cat5. We've gone into this. It is now negotiated the voltage.
Exactly. And it's spitting out, because I've set it here, it's spitting out 12 volts here, and this is the the Dante signal.
Right.
So single Cat5 data power. And then from the power, I have it going into this power distribution here. And you can even see, because it's got a handy voltage meter, I have power going to the A10 receiver here, power going to the A10 receiver here, and then I'll talk about this device in a second. That's USB powered.
All right.
And so, following the signal chain, we have our A10 receiver here, and it is getting power through this PSC box, and it is spitting out Dante right in the back. That, of course, is going back. It's also, because Audio Limited have included a way for the receivers to give data. It's got the capability via USB, because remember, they imagined that this was hooked directly into a sound card.
Right.
So via USB to give telemetry, receiver information, to a software program called WaveTool.
So you're talking about battery information, you're talking about actually seeing and hearing the audio.
Yeah, because it's Dante, I can hear it. So here's the thing, and this is really important. It's one thing for me to fantasize about having my receivers 300 feet away from the sound cart, but if I don't know what's going on with my transmitters, and I don't know what's going on even with my receivers, what good is that really? It's not that helpful to be blind like that. So the other part of this equation is, how do I get telemetry back? How do I get it as if the receiver were directly connected to the sound card? Now,
so just as a recap.
Yes.
So we have put power over Ethernet. It's coming into here. It's splitting our Dante in power. So this is 150 feet away. It's sitting there closer to set. We're not waiting on electrics to power it. It's all of this is being powered over this cable. And then this is a bonus.
Well, and the more I thought about it, the more critical this part of this became.
But this is all powering just fine, functional, but not necessarily as useful as possible.
So now let's talk about the bonus. The bonus takes that USB port and encapsulates it in a TCP/IP stream that goes back to the computer. Because remember, the computer is just another node on this network.
So our local network.
And it's presenting whatever that USB port had as a USB connection. So the way that Audio Limited has envisioned us using this device is right at our sound cart, and then plug a computer into the USB port and get all of the information that we need from their receivers. That's how the company has envisioned us using it. We're sort of pushing that vision a little bit, remoting the receivers. But what we have to solve before we can do that to make this truly useful is, how do we take that USB port and make the computer think it's connected via USB, but really it's connected over Ethernet? And that's what that box does.
So, in summary, because the way this was built, it's USB, was supposed to go right into a computer on your sound card. There's no way to get, because it's not coming through the Dante protocol. We had to find a way to cheat the system to say, we're going to change USB to Ethernet back into the computer. So we're basically just changing it from USB to Ethernet back to USB.
So now, if we switch back to the computer, that box that we're talking about shows up as what's called a virtual link. So if we, it's this link here. And yeah, if we switch to the overhead, Joe has, it's that box there. And then switch back to the computer. Shows up on the computer as a USB device. And what that allows us to do is run this program that is compatible with a whole host of receivers called WaveTool.
So you can actually, we're seeing on 7 and 8, we're seeing, I'm 8, you're I guess 7.
Yeah, hey, there we go, There's my audio. Now, notice something very interesting. WaveTool is a third-party program, really cool program, and I'll get into that in a few minutes, just briefly, because that's really part of this whole equation. But you only see battery telemetry, which is there, on native, and if we switch to the wide shot, on native Audio Limited transmitters.
Gotcha. So I think we're on Electro here. So that
if we switch back to the computer,
you don't see on 7 and 8, you don't see the battery signal.
Correct. You do, however, see audio. And how do you see audio? Because it's routed over the Dante. And if we check our Dante virtual sound card, which is Peter's MacBook Air, you can see that's how it sees it. And presumably it would go from the MacBook Air. Also, it would might go to a Sound Devices recorder or any Dante recorder, Aton Kantar, soon to be Diva 24, etc.
All right, so this is great. We've remoted the receivers to set, but what are some other advantages of doing that?
Well, I think anytime you have a long run of coax, that introduces a loss. I've been concentrating on the physical, frailty or potential frailty of the coax, but that's a loss. So when you have a loss like that, you have to have an amplifier. When you have an amplifier, that introduces noise. Can introduce overmodulation if there's all of the sort of disadvantages that go along with that can be eliminated when you put the receivers close to set. That's a very short run of coax cable. Maybe 2 or 3 feet.
So coming out of this to your antennas, it can be on stands.
I mean, it really, there's a huge amount of advantages. Similarly, this being New York, a lot of times 3-story walk-up is your location. You may not want to schlep the whole cart up the stairs. So, traditionally you've run coax, got to put it through a window or something, or get, ridiculously tall stands, which is what we had in Vancouver, which a ton of sandbags and weigh a lot. this lets you have one, Cat5 cable. You could just cut the ends off if you want to, be sort of unsavory about it. It's not precious.
Right.
You're not worried about being cinched in the window or something accidentally.
So you're down on the street. This is 3 stories up. You've got your third on-set monitoring what's going on, so they feel connected in the loop, and you're down on set, or down on the street, remoted and happy as a bee in your tent. Yeah,
that's exactly the advantage. Yeah.
There's some things on the sound card side we haven't talked about to connect this, and that is now that we've come from the sound card to the remote location of the receivers and now back.
Right.
How do you route that? We need a switch of some sort, right?
Well, that's it's the same PoE switch. So if we switch to the overhead, we could plug our Aton or 970 Dante recorder right
into
there.
Right in there.
Yeah. That's basically in a nutshell. But once you sort of get into this program, first of all, once you get into this program actually is pretty cool. In terms of battery information, right now, in this configuration through the A10 rack, it only works with audio-limited transmitters and receivers.
Right.
It'll work if you added to this rack Electro Venue, which you could power over Ethernet, but then you don't get the Dante, which is why I like this rack. It'll natively work with the Venue 2 and stuff like that.
So you could use this with a Venue 2, but
receivers. Exactly.
Pluses and minuses with everything we do.
Right. So, but in this particular configuration, I can monitor audio from any of the channels that are getting a signal, and I can route the audio either into the computer or, since we're geeking out, I am routing it. And if we cut to the wide shot again, to this Dante PoE-powered headphone amplifier.
So this is bonus number 2?
Bonus number 2, yeah. And so, this could be a station at the cart or whatever, and, a third could be at the cart and just sort of like listening to... are you able to mix that down, or are we just hearing the 8 channels? On this one, it's just solo, whichever you choose.
Gotcha.
But this program also has a really interesting feature, which is if you hook this into a router, now we can go to any iOS connected device. So we have an iPad on the table, and I can see audio coming into here. If it's an audio limited transmitter, I can see the battery information. So now a third can really.
So I've got my iPhone or whatever. I'm there trying to say I'm wiring somebody up.
Right. And it's streaming audio, so I can, let's say I go to wire you up. I wire you up. I can make sure your battery's good, and then because it's streaming audio, I can listen to your mic.
All right, you're listening to me. What's the latency on it?
There's about a second of latency. Half a second maybe. Yeah, about a half a second. Yeah.
Check. Oh, not even. That's
it's pretty good.
Wow.
So
that's
it's a good tool. Look, we call this Gotham Labs for a reason, right? This is all sort of like the beginning embryonic stages of what is possible. Part of why I want to show this and why I'm excited about it is I hope that some people watching this are inspired. And if we haven't said it already, we have for sale all of these devices. We've set up agreements. We can sell the switch. We can bundle it with the PoE splitter. So if somebody wants to experiment, certainly let us know. But also, I hope to inspire a few manufacturers. Like, this is pretty cool. And other manufacturers have already added PoE to their devices, like Glen Sound in their headphone amplifier. And they have A to D converters that do that. So, I mean, I think that this is a very viable standard. I know when I was on set in Vancouver, I was really very worried about that coax cable getting damaged. I would have been a lot more relaxed if it was Cat5 that I was running. So yeah, that's what I got.
Did you use?
Sorry,
yes. You used Cat5. You used coax in Vancouver.
I had to. Yeah. I mean, it was just there was one of the great privileges I think that I have is, I have time to experiment.
Right.
But obviously when you're on set, that's not a place for experimentation.
Right, but this came out of, okay, that could have been better.
That could have been a lot better, yeah.
This is our chance to, in the interim, find all of these products and merge them together to say, all right, let's create something that will work better for that use, that case scenario. Yeah,
and I think that this WaveTool software probably merits its own live stream. And certainly if you'd like to see that, let us know in the comments. But I know I've been in the mixer's chair. I've been in the third's chair where the mixer's telling you, hey, so-and-so's battery's about to die. And if I had a way to be proactive about it, I could have changed it at the break 5 minutes ago. Now I got to run in there. That's awful.
Right.
So to share that telemetry information is huge. So I think there's a lot going on here. It started with this idea of like, how do I get away from coax, and then it sort of ended up in this.
So that's Gotham Labs 1.0.
No, beta. Gotham
Labs beta. So we found a way, to kind of wrap it up.
Yeah.
So power over Ethernet, a way to virtually listen and see telemetry from any iOS device, convert the Dante with power over Ethernet, and also be able to listen remotely with your headphones.
Yeah.
I miss anything?
No, and I think all of these things can be sort of stretched into other applications too. This could be an outstation for a script supervisor, a video village, or something like that. That somebody that wants a high quality link could be, put into a speaker, like a battery powered speaker to get a quick.
Anything.
Yeah. Let us know if you want to see more of this stuff. It certainly gets me out in the open, about stuff that I'm thinking about and working on, and I appreciate you guys coming out, and Joe, thanks for helping me with this. And
sure. That's great. Yeah, we'll be back with more of these things. If you are interested in coming here and labbing something out, or have some uses and you want to join us for a live stream and show us what you've done, let us know. You can send ideas or questions to info@gothamsound.com. Visit us with all of our archives to see any product videos or any other videos we've produced at gothamsound.tv. And follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest news, events, sales, and anything else fun and exciting going on at Gotham Sound.
Thank you for watching.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. I don't think you'd be happy if a bee was in your tent, though.